Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants, to this session of our Islam Study Circle. The Quranic verses that we are going to study today have been taken from Surah Maida, and these are actually verses 90 to 91. These verses read, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu innamal khamru wal maysaru wal ansabu wal azlam rijsum min amalish shaitan فاجتنبوه لعلكم تفلحون إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقع بينكم العداوة والبغضاء في الخمر والميسر ويصدكم عن ذكر الله وعن الصلاة فهل أنتم منتهون. Believers, this liquor, gambling, idols, and these divining arrows are filthy works of Satan. So stay away from them that you may succeed. Satan seeks to stir up enmity and malice among you by means of liquor and gambling, and to keep you from the remembrance of Allah and from the prayer. So will you not stay clear of them? These verses, dear viewers, occur in the Quran, and they point to a very rampant evil which was found in the Arab society, and indeed in many societies of today. And the stress here is that things which are forbidden for our inner purification, things which are forbidden for our our tazkiyah and self-purification should be avoided at all costs. And some of these are mentioned here, and one of them being al-khamr, which is of course liquor. We all know that liquor is something which intoxicates us. It pushes us beyond our limits of intellect, and we just lose our senses at times. And people do ask the question that at times we do not drink liquor to the extent that we get drunk or we get intoxicated. So why is it that a little liquor cannot be consumed? The answer to this question is that Islam lays its boundaries very far away from its prohibitions, so that a person is not induced into something by consuming lesser amounts of it. He or she might just step into something or fall into something which is undesirable without actually realizing it. So it's like putting a fence around a pit much farther away from the pit itself, so that people can stay away as far as possible. So it's much like, I often explain it by saying that volcanoes, there are times that volcanoes don't erupt all the time, and there are times when a sea or a river is not flooded at all the times. But still, because of caution, what we human beings do, we actually evacuate, or we would not allow people to inhabit areas near a volcano or near a sea or even a river, which can even flood, let's say, once in a century, or maybe even more than that, simply because the eruption is at times unpredictable. So this is very humanly, I would say, just as we humans take extra precaution from entering in something which might not be of a very conducive nature to us. In a similar way, the Almighty has asked us has prohibited us even a drop of liquor, because, as you see, that drop can sometimes lead to excesses. So it's like being extra precautionary in this matter. Then what is mentioned here is al-maisir, which is of course gambling. Gambling is again something which is detrimental to our inner purification, and the reason for this is that all of us know that when we gamble, we actually chance our luck, and at that time we are actually producing this thing in our intellect, in our nature, that we would rather try to earn easy money as far as we can. And this is how we can clearly see that chancing one's luck makes a person coward, makes a person lose interest in hard work. So anything which is detrimental to our inner purification is again stopped by Islam. One must realize that at times speculation is not of the nature of gambling. For example, when a person fixes a price of an item or speculates on various market forces regarding the prices, that's not necessarily gambling. One knows when these games of chance, for example, poker or things which are very similar to it, they are based on chance and total luck. It is here that a person loses interest in the hard work that one might do, and at the same time, he or she becomes a person who would not like to spend money, or he would like to pocket it in the lockers and not make it come out and indulge in open competition. And then the verse mentions wal ansab, which of course refers to idols which were placed in the time of the Prophet, and idol worship was something which was not something which can be allowed at any cost. It says that divining arrows, this was again a practice of Arab origin in which people would gamble on these arrows and they would chance their luck also and try to find out their fate through these divining arrows, and a number of superstitions were also associated with these. So look what the Quran says, that this liquor, this gambling, these idols and divining arrows, they are filthy works of Satan. Ritsum min amali shaitan fajtanibuhu. So abstain for it. People often say that why is it that liquor, for example, is not expressly forbidden by the words haram or harrama, and they need to be told that when you make something prohibited, it does not always stand prohibited by using the word haram. There are several words in Arabic to use this or to make this connotation of abstention, and ijtanab for fajtanibuhu, as the word is here, is equally compelling in this regard. So the Quran says that these are filthy works of Satan and one must abstain from them. And look what the verse promises, لَأَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, so that you may reach success, so that you may succeed, of course, in the hereafter, because it is these things, liquor, gambling, idols worship and divining arrows, which actually take us away from the Almighty and from becoming a positive individual and contributing to the society. And then the Quran actually points out the evils of how these activities adversely affect our lives. It says, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَن يُوقِعَ بَيْنَكُمُ الْعَدَاوَةَ وَالْبَغْضَاءَ فِي الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ. Through this liquor and gambling, Satan seeks to stir up enmity and malice between people. And also from this, وَيَسُدَّكُمْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَعَنِ الصَّلَاةِ. When you indulge in these things, of course, these things are such that once you start these things, there is no end to it, and they become much of an addiction, and one keeps on doing these things without realizing his obligations and his moral responsibilities. And one of the biggest responsibilities that a person has in this regard, of course, is to keep God in remembrance and in particular pray to the Almighty. So when a person is indulging in these things, he often forgets these things. Again, this argument is made by people that what if this indulgence is to a particular extent and it does not actually go beyond that extent. So as I had explained earlier, because of the fact that at times something which leads to an evil, line is drawn very far away from that, so that the person does not actually lose control and is always very cautionate in this and very circumspect. So that is why the Almighty has asked us to abstain from these things. And look what these words says at the end. It says, فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. So will you not abstain from these? So will you not stay clear of these things? Again, the purpose is to stir and to caution and prod human beings that these are such horrible things of Satan and horrible acts of Satan that we have to stay clear of them. We have to navigate absolutely clear of them, and we must not even go near them. It's like saying that if you go near them, there's no one can tell when you can fall into that pit and go deeper and deeper and damage our own inner purification. So it's very important, dear viewers, to realize that these are things which we face every day in our society, and because of the fact that these things are used as addictions so as to soothe one's minds, particularly if one is depressed or if one is in a state of shock or in a state of even happiness. So what happens is that these things induce the sorrow and happiness associated even further. And this is how a person goes deeper and deeper into these states of mind and loses control over his own routines. And the biggest concern of the Almighty is that one loses control over this routine of remembering the Almighty. And also, this can become a means of mutual enmity. And we know that gambling has ended up in so many disputes, in so many fights, in so many brawls, that one can clearly see how visionary this statement has been, and we must try our best not to indulge in these things. And of course, they have their own attraction, and it's difficult to abstain from them. But then, if we have a higher goal in life, if we are high achievers, if we think of the hereafter, if we have even some targets set before us in this world, no one will play on a pitch which one is not used to play. So this is of absolute importance and of paramount significance, that we have to be extremely careful in things which relate to gambling, or which are gambling per se, and similarly which relate to liquor and all sorts of intoxication. And we have to be very, very clear in this, that intoxication and all these things make us lose our senses. And when we lose our senses, we lose our humanity, we lose our inside, and we end up at times in situations that we can never be proud of. Let's now move on to the next part of our study circle. This is the hadith that we're going to study today. The hadith is actually taken from one of the top hadith books of the 6 canonical collections, and it is narrated from Abdullah ibn Umar. The hadith book is actually the Al-Jami al-Sahih of Imam Muslim, from which this narrative is taken. It says, "An ibn Umar anna Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam qala salatul jama'a afdalu min salatil fazz bi 27 daraja," which means that Abdullah ibn Umar reported that God's messenger said, the reward of praying in congregation is 27 times that of praying alone. So it's basically an exhortation and a means of urging people to pray in congregation as far as they can, to reach out for their mosques as far as they can, because obviously we can all understand that the spirituality and the comfort and the advancement that we feel when we enter a mosque is something to be felt. And the prayer that we offer in a mosque, in congregation, has a very potent effect on our lives. It is a very, very strong influence on our souls. It's a soul-stirring place, these mosques, and one has to have a very strong relationship. Of course, it's not obligatory to go and pray in the mosque. It's a means of great reward. However, we have to realize that we have to reap as much as we can for our own selves. And there are places in the world where mosques are far off, and it's not always easy to go for 5 times every day. So even if we are able to do it once a day, or maybe once in 2 days or 3 days, whatever the distance and whatever our compelling our things, our circumstances would be in stopping us from going there, we need as much as possible to enjoy this spiritual atmosphere, because it brings us much closer to God. When we make an effort and go out and go to a place, that effort also focuses us. It brings us to this point of attention that we are going in the presence of the Almighty, and that we have to be extremely careful, and that we have to be very attentive to what we are doing. There are narratives which, on the other hand, seem to imply that praying in congregation is obligation. For example, we know that there is a narrative which says that the Prophet became very angry one day when he saw that certain people were not coming for the prayer, and he said that had it been in his own power, he would have burnt the houses of these people who are not coming to pray. Now, this narrative must not be confused with this narrative, because obviously the two would be entirely contradictory to one another. One is saying that praying in congregation earns a high reward, and the other thing is saying that if people don't come to the mosque, the Prophet would burn their houses. So what is the reconciliation? The reconciliation, of course, is very clear. We know that in the times of the Prophet Muhammad, when the hypocrites in Medina, they would stay back from the prayers, and they would not come to the prayers. And there was a time in the era of the Prophet when the hypocrites and such weak Muslims were to be discriminated and differentiated from the main lot, so they could stand alone, and of course then become worthy of God's wrath. So it was in such instances that the Prophet said that even if you hear the azan, or you cannot stay back. So this particular narrative has a very special connotation, and it does not relate to common circumstances. As far as general circumstances are concerned, coming to the mosque is a optional act. It's a very worthy act. It does earn a very high reward, but it does not at all entail that if we don't come to the mosque, then our prayer will not be accepted, or there has to be a certain excuse which stops us from going to the mosque. This is not the case. Going to the mosque is always a coveted thing, is always a thing which can bring us great reward. As I said, our own spirituality is positively influenced, and we have to make this effort. Even if we are living in a country where there are few mosques, maybe we have to go in a car, then even if this can happen once a day or maybe once in 2 days, it's highly recommended, because once you experience this prayer in congregation, this has its own significance, it has its own effect. And of course, needless to say, that you are able to meet people there of your own sort. You are able to meet people there who, with whom you can socialize and with whom you can exchange. And we are weak people. We need people to stay with and to hang out with. And there's no better companion who is a companion in your prayer. At times you find good people there, and it's also a means of connecting yourselves to your own fraternity. So we come to the third part of our study circle, and this is Bible verse of the day. In fact, these are verses in the Bible which I'll just read out and let you know that that the prayer itself, or the Salah, is something. It's erroneous to believe that it began with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's erroneous to believe that most worship rituals, beside the prayer, for example, fasting or doing Hajj or giving charity, they began with the Prophet. It's a very erroneous conception in this regard. We know that the prayer started much earlier. The Prophet Adam started off praying, and then all the prophets prayed. And we know that there is a narrative which tells us that when Gabriel came to the Prophet once, he taught him the times of prayer, all those 5 times. The first day he came and he taught him the extreme starting time, and then the next day he came and he taught the Prophet the extreme ending time of each prayer. And he said that between these times the Prophet can pray. And he then also remarked that these are the times which have remained as the times of prayer, for every prophet of God, So Jesus or Moses, Noah or Shoaib, or all these prophets prayed these 5 prayers, and as did their followers. And one should not think that these 5 prayers have originated with the Prophet Muhammad. He just, of course, sanctioned them further. And there are so many passages in the Bible which I'm just going to read out before you, which will let you know how prayer is mentioned in the Bible, although it's in a rather veiled form, in the form of an insinuation. But you can clearly see that it is mentioned there. And we even find people like Abu Zar Ghifari telling us that he was praying the prayer before he even met the Prophet himself. And we do know that the Quraysh used to gather for the Jummah prayer. And we do know that the Pandits of the Quraysh, they used to offer the prayer in the Baytullah, and they would offer it as we know from the Quran. When they would go to offer the prayer, they would do it in a very hesitant way. So the Quran also has these insinuations which tell us that the Quraysh did pray, the people of the book did pray. Of course, this happened in the time of Jesus, that the Sharia was revoked by Saint Paul after him. And this actually led to the fact that some of the prayers, the way they had been prayed, used to be offered, they actually lost their form. But even today we find followers of Jesus praying, although it has become optional for them, and although they have actually done away with the form of the prayer, but they still pray 5 times. If you ask any priest, at times they combine it, and they don't have this ruku or sujood the way we have it with us, but it still exists in its form, its distorted form. So let me just give you some pointers from the book of Genesis, which of course is the earliest book, and we know the history of this book, that various prophets, including the prophet Abraham, the prophet Lot, they have been mentioned in this book of Genesis. And it could well be that parts of this book actually is the Sahifa of Ibrahim, which is mentioned in Surah Ala in the Quran. So it says in Genesis chapter number 12, verse 8, and moving on from there to the mountain on the east of Bethel, He put up his tent, having Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And this is talking about Abraham, of course. And there he made an altar and gave worship to the name of the Lord. So it's like Sabbih bihamdi rabbika, will we say, or Wazkurullaha, to remembering God. So the way the prayer is mentioned in the Quran, also at times by its constituents like the ruku or the sujood, or by merely saying that remembering God. So this is a way in which the Quran actually calls the prayer. In a very similar way, you find this book of Genesis calling so. And then you can, I'm just going to skip through and read chapter number 26, verse 25 of the book of Genesis. It says, then he made an altar there and gave worship to the name of the Lord. Remember, give worship to the name of the Lord. It's like saying, Wazkur isma rabbika, the way we have in the Quran. Remember the name of the God. And put up his tents there, and there his servants made a water hole. This is, of course, the book of Genesis. Then we have the book of Exodus. You can find several references in that as well. And again, in the book of Psalms of David, of King David, we have these words that the sea is his and he made it, and the dry land was formed by his hands. Oh, come, let us give worship. Let us give worship, falling down on our knees before the Lord our Maker. So, as I said, that these are veiled references and rather vague as well, but if you read these scriptures in the light of the Quran, you can clearly see how they are mentioned. And let's finally come to the New Testament, when the prophet Jesus, of course, is making his point here. This is the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14 and verse 23. It says, and after he had sent the people away, he went up into the mountain by himself for prayer. And when evening was come, he was there by himself. And then in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verse 35, it says, and in the morning, a long time before daylight, he got up and went out to a quiet place, and there gave himself up to the prayer. So it's like praying, of course, it's like praying the early Fajr prayer, or even the Tahajjud prayer is mentioned here. So you can see, viewers, that just as in the Quran, we don't have a clear reference of the prayer because it's an established sunnah and transmitted in parallel. And the Quran just refers to it as if it is an established practice. In a very similar way, the previous scriptures also refer to this practice as if it was going on in the society and it's being just referred to. And it's not that the Quran or the previous scriptures have originated these practices by their own selves or told us for the first time. It is the established practice of the followers of the prophets of God, through which these worship rituals, in particular the prayer, as we are discussing today, is mentioned. Otherwise, when we have time, we'll discuss the Hajj, we'll discuss Zakat, we'll discuss animal sacrifice and other worship rituals. We'll get to know that all of them started right from Adam and have been continuing ever since. And it is erroneous to believe that they were instituted in the time of the Prophet Muhammad. And also we need to understand that some practices have become distorted, some things have been lost to posterity, but that again is one of the reasons why the Quran and the final prophet was sent, so as to revive some of the things that have been lost. Otherwise, we have to be careful in this regard that this is something which has always been there in the form of established practices of the followers of the Prophet. Before I open your mics for your questions, I would make this slight departure and perhaps make this a permanent feature, that we will push these question answers to the very end instead of having them one in between and then one at the end, because at times it disturbs the tempo. So I'll just go on to the fourth segment now, and the fifth segment would be your questions. So the fourth segment that I've selected today, of course, is discussion on a particular topic. And the topic that I have discussed today is judging people, which is something which we often do and which we must never do, in fact. So judging people by their appearance, judging people by what they speak or talk, judging people by their clothes, judging people by their fate, all these judgmental attitudes we must avoid. We have no right to judge people. We have no right to judge a person or make a statement about him or her simply because we don't have the data, and it's none of our business as well. Judging people is God's domain, and that is why He has set up a day of judgment, so that He can finally and perfectly judge people. In this world, each one of us is passing through a trial and test. We must realize this. We must also think that we have to judge our own selves, because it is here that we have the data. It is here that we can actually do something positively. We can judge our own selves and we can improve our own selves. We cannot judge other people because we don't have enough and sufficient data. We don't know how that person is going through in his or her life. He or she might be passing through very tough and testing and rough times and would be trying his or her best to live up as a believer, but at times it does not show on the face, it does not show on your apparel, it does not show on your behavior, because things take time, and not always people are displaying what they are from inside. So this is a data that we best should ignore. We must not indulge in areas that we have no business to indulge, and one of these is that we judge people. And judging the fate of a person, whether he's going to go to hell or heaven, is another heinous practice attached to this judgment. This is something which is just the prerogative of God. No one else has this prerogative. And again, judging people by their apparel, I have seen women who are actually covering their heads. They regard themselves to be superior at times to those women who don't cover their heads. I can sense men who keep beards feeling themselves superior to those who don't have beards, or maybe other signs which are considered to be signs of religion. Again, this is a very, very wrong practice. We just cannot know how and when a person is like from inside. This is the prerogative of the Almighty. This is the total prerogative of the Almighty. We have to concentrate on our own selves. We must forget about other things. Also, there is one more thing that we might realize at this time, and that is that if we have to judge people regarding certain things, then it has to be by their standards, by what they think is right, not by our own standards. Judging people, and that too, that judgment has to be limited to a particular affair. It cannot be a sweeping judgment. It cannot be a sweeping statement given regarding that people. If in a particular manner a person is to be judged, then that judgment has to be based on the principles that he or she thinks are right, and he or she is, whether she is following them or not. So again, this is a point of caution that I would like to have made, and I hope that I have tried not to mince words. So let us be more careful in not judging people. Let us judge our own selves if there has to be this judgment. And in fact, this should be our motto in Ramadan, which is just about to arrive, that let's make this month of Ramadan a month of self-accountability, a month in which we will judge ourselves. We'll forget about what others are doing, what others are saying, because that's none of our business. Of course, we have this relationship of being their well-wishers, and as well-wishers, we can point out a lot of good things to them, but judging them is not the right thing. In Ramadan, we have to judge ourselves, and there's no better a time of the year than Ramadan, when we have to change our routines in life, and we, of course, slow down because of these physical deprivations that we do, or we deprive ourselves of food and drink and our own carnal desires. So this is the best time to judge ourselves, and let this Ramadan be a month in which we will diligently judge ourselves and make this commitment to become improved individuals. So with these words, I come to an end to our study circle. So I can now open your mics. If you have any questions, please let me know. So viewers, it seems that there are no questions, so I wish you the very best in this forthcoming month of Ramadan. Let us enjoy and spiritually benefit from this month, and make it a memorable month. And also we are able to judge ourselves and spend more time in meditating and trying to figure out what is going wrong in our lives and how we can set ourselves to better targets. Thank you very much. Inshallah, see you next Saturday.